The creak of a floorboard in an empty house. The faint, cold scent of a meal cooked over 2 centuries ago, left to congeal on a low wooden table. A single, small gaita sandal lying on its side in the dirt path, as if the child who'd been kicking it along had simply evaporated into the autumn air. This is the silence that fell over the village of Kobeuchi. Not a peaceful silence, a stolen one. It was the 12th day of the 9th month, in the 4th year of the Ane era, late October 1779, in the remote, mist-shrouded mountains of Aomori Prefecture. The village of Kobeuchi was a cluster of perhaps 24 wooden homes with thatched roofs clinging to the rugged slopes. It was a place defined by the rhythm of the seasons, by the planting and harvesting of buckwheat, by the deep, ancient forests that pressed in from all sides. The people here lived by the grace and the whim of the mountain, and they knew its every mood, or so they thought. The morning of the disappearance was, by all accounts later whispered, unremarkable. The sun rose, pale and weak over the peaks. Smoke began to curl from hearths. The village headman, a stern, weathered man named Jiro, looked up at the slopes of Mount Kamuri, its peak already dusted with an early snow, and felt a familiar low thrum of anxiety. The harvest had been poor. Not disastrously so, but enough to make the winter ahead a long and lean one. Still, life went on. His daughter, Kimi, a girl of 16 with clever hands, was in the family's field, carefully harvesting the last of the radishes. She paused, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek, and looked towards the forest line. She thought she saw a flicker of movement, a shape that was not quite a tree, a color that was the deep, impossible white of old bone. She blinked, and it was gone. Trick of the light, she told herself. The mountain spirits were restless, that was all. They often were at this time of year. Down in the village, the carpenter, Kenji, was hammering a new plank onto his shed. The sound echoed sharp and clear through the valley. His wife, Sato, was inside their home, stirring a pot of millet and mountain vegetables. The scent was hearty, simple. She hummed an old folk song, one her own grandmother had taught her, a melody about a fox who fell in love with the moon. Next door, the children, too young for the fields, were playing a game of tag, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the solemn calls of the crows. This is the scene you must hold in your mind. A living, breathing community. A completely ordinary day.
But the mountain had been speaking, and few had been listening. For weeks there had been signs, an unusual number of landslides on the higher trails, blocking paths used by hunters. The village's single Shinto shrine, dedicated to the kami of Mount Kamuri, had been found with its sacred rope, the Shimenawa, snapped and lying on the ground. The local priest, an old man who claimed to dream the dreams of the mountain, had become increasingly withdrawn, his mutterings about a great hunger and a debt coming due dismissed as the ramblings of age. The debt. That was the heart of it. The folklore of this region was thick with stories of the Yama no Kami, the god of the mountain. It was a capricious deity, neither purely good nor evil, but powerful and demanding of respect. It provided the trees for shelter, the game for food, the pure water from its springs. But it demanded something in return. Silence, reverence, and occasionally a sacrifice. Not always a ritual offering of an animal or rice wine. Sometimes, the stories whispered, the mountain demanded a different kind of payment. A silent sacrifice. One would that not be announced with drums and prayer, but one that would simply be taken. The afternoon wore on. Kenji finished his work and went inside, sitting cross-legged on the tatami mat, waiting for his meal. Sato placed the steaming bowl in front of him. He grunted his thanks. Outside, the children's game had broken up, and one little boy, Taro, was sitting on a stump, trying to fix a broken toy cart. His mother had called him once, her voice sharp, telling him to come in and wash up. He'd ignored her, his small fingers fumbling with a piece of twine. That was the last sound. A mother's call unanswered. The clatter of a wooden bowl as Sato set it down. The rhythmic scrape of Kimi's hoe in the hard earth. Then, nothing. Not a scream, not a crash, not a roar. Just a profound, absolute, and total silence that fell over Kobeuchi like a shroud. 2 days later, a traveling merchant named Haisuke, who made the difficult journey to Kobeuchi once a season to trade salt and needles for dried fish and woven baskets, found the village. He came down the mountain path, his pack heavy on his shoulders, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of life. But there was only the wind.
He saw the first house, its door swinging open on its hinges. "Hello?" he called out, his voice swallowed by the immense quiet. He peered inside. A low table was set. 2 bowls of congealed grayish millet sat upon it. Chopsticks were laid neatly to the side, unused. A cup of cold tea. It was as if the inhabitants had been summoned away at the very moment they were about to eat. Puzzled, and now with a cold knot tightening in his stomach, Haisuke moved to the next house, and the next. Every home was the same. Meals left uneaten. Hearth fires long dead, nothing but cold ash. A half-mended kimono lay on a sleeping mat, a needle still threaded and stuck into the fabric. In the carpenter shed, Kenji's tools were laid out neatly, as if he were about to return to his work. But there were no people, no bodies, no signs of a struggle, no blood. It was as if every single man, woman, and child, perhaps 60 souls in total, had simply stood up and walked into the mountain air, vanishing between one heartbeat and the next. Haisuke's breath came in ragged pants, his fear now a living thing in his throat. He ran to the headman's house. It was just as still. Jiro's ledger, where he recorded village taxes and rice yields, lay open, the inkstone dry beside it. And then Haisuke saw it. On the path outside, a single child's sandal. It was the only thing out of place in the entire, terrifyingly orderly scene. Haisuke did not stay another moment. He fled, stumbling back up the mountain path, his pack abandoned, his heart hammering against his ribs. He did not stop until he reached the next village, where he collapsed, babbling a story of a ghost village, of a people stolen by the yokai, the demons of the mountain. The news traveled, as such news always does, from village to village, growing and distorting with each telling. It reached the ears of the local magistrate, a samurai named Tanaka, a pragmatic man who served the Tokugawa Shogunate. He was a man of order, of records, of taxes. A village could not simply vanish. It was an administrative impossibility. He gathered a small contingent of his men and made the journey to Kobeuchi. What he found unnerved him to his core. He confirmed Haisuke's story in every chilling detail. The silent houses, the uneaten meals, the utter lack of any rational explanation. There was no evidence of bandit attack. No valuables were missing, no homes were ransacked. There was no sign of disease, no bodies, no stench of death. It was a bureaucratic nightmare. A village that was on his tax rolls, a producer of rice and labor, was now a void. Magistrate Tanaka was a loyal servant of the shogunate, and he understood one thing above all else. Panic is a contagion more dangerous than any plague. The Tokugawa regime had maintained its rigid control over Japan through a policy of absolute stability. Stories of cursed mountains and vanishing villages could shatter that stability. They could cause unrest. They could make people question the order of things. So he made a decision, a cold, calculated political decision. He ordered his men to secure the village, not to investigate, but to erase. They boarded up the houses,
They gathered the few wandering livestock and disposed of them. And then Magistrate Tanaka sat down at the headman's own table and composed his report. It did not mention silent sacrifices or uneaten meals. It stated, simply and officially, that the village of Kobeuchi, due to its remote location and unsustainable population, had been formally disbanded. Its residents had been relocated. It was a lie, of course, a clean administrative lie. But the erasure did not stop there. In the Grand Cartographic Archives of the Shogunate in Edo, the official maps of the Aomori region were carefully updated. The tiny inked-in characters that spelled out Kobeuchi were scraped away from the vellum. The lines denoting its paths were redrawn to show only untouched forest. Within a year, as far as the government was concerned, the village of Kobeuchi had never existed at all. Yet, you cannot so easily scrape a story from the human heart. In the villages that dotted the valleys around Mount Kamuri, the memory of Kobeuchi lived on. It curdled from a historical event into dark folklore. The old priest's mutterings were remembered and given new, terrifying weight. The story solidified, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter in hushed tones by the fireside.
They said the mountain kami was not just restless, but angry. The poor harvests of recent years were a warning. The people of Kobeuchi had perhaps failed in their reverence. Maybe they had cut down a sacred tree. Maybe they had hunted a creature that was under the kami's protection. Or maybe the debt was simply older, a generational promise that had come due. The kami demanded a silent sacrifice. Not a ritual killing, but a claiming. It would take the entire village all at once, absorbing them back into the soil, the rock, the very spirit of the mountain. This is where the story would end, as a perfect, unnerving folktale, if not for the slow, patient work of historians and geologists, piecing together the truth from the fragments the shogunate left behind. Cross-referencing the few surviving pre-erasure maps with modern geological surveys, a clear and horrifyingly rational picture begins to emerge. The village of Kobeuchi was not just at the foot of Mount Kamuri. It was situated directly beneath a massive, unstable slope, a layer of weak shale and soil that had been saturated by unusually heavy, persistent rains that autumn. The silence that Heisuke and Magistrate Tanaka encountered was not supernatural. It was the silence after. The event was not a slow-moving famine or a plague, but something instantaneous, catastrophic, a landslide. Not a rumbling, grinding slide that would have given warning. This would have been a phenomenon known as a debris flow. A sudden liquefaction of the entire mountainside. A wall of mud, rock, and trees moving with the speed and force of a freight train. It would have hit Kobeuchi with no more than a deafening, all-consuming whoosh. It would have buried every house, every path, every single person in a tomb of wet earth and stone in a matter of seconds. It would have explained the uneaten meals, the disaster struck at dusk, the moment of the evening meal. It would have explained the lack of bodies. They were buried under dozens of feet of debris, a mass grave sculpted by nature itself. It would have explained the sandal, swept from a child's foot by the unimaginable force of the flow. The shogunate's surveyors would have seen the raw, scarred face of the mountain and understood immediately that the village was gone. Not just depopulated, but physically obliterated.
The decision to relocate it, on paper, was a cover-up. Not for a mystery, but for a natural disaster so complete and terrifying that acknowledging it could cause widespread fear in a region dotted with similar mountain villages. The folklore of the silent sacrifice, then, is a human masterpiece of psychological coping. The truth that the very ground beneath your feet could, without warning, rise up and swallow you whole, was too random, too senseless, too horrifying to accept. It was easier, somehow more comforting, to believe in a capricious god. A deity, however cruel, has a reason. It operates on a logic of debt and payment. A landslide has no mind, no motive. It is pure, indifferent chaos. So, the memory of Kobeuchi lives on in two forms. In the cold, silent archives of a fallen government, it is a bureaucratic ghost, a line item struck from a ledger. And in the misty valleys of Aomori, it is a chilling campfire story, a warning to always respect the mountain, lest it demand its payment once more. The truth is that the villagers of Kobeuchi did not vaporize from memory. They were buried by it, first by mud and then by lies, and finally by the stories we tell ourselves to make the unbearable darkness just a little easier to face.